Hi, welcome to Train Signal. My name is Bill and this lesson is creating web applications. So in previous lessons we've talked a lot about web applications, what they are and how they work along with site collections and application pools, everything. By now you probably have a pretty good understanding of what a web application is and how it works. Now, if you're having any problems, this lesson is going to help put it all together. We're going to go ahead and we are going to create not one but two separate web applications. We are going to create one for our GlobalMantics intranet site, our local intranet site for our company, and we are going to create another one that will host our MySite site collections. So lots of fun stuff we got coming ahead. So let's go ahead and let's get started. Okay, we're here now on a client machine. We're on a Windows 8 client machine, and you probably already recognize the Metro interface. Let's go ahead and go to the desktop. And we're doing this because from now on, we're going to access our SharePoint server remotely. Let's be honest, if we were SharePoint administrators, we wouldn't go running to the server room every time we needed to go ahead and work on our SharePoint server, would we? No, we'd sign in remotely. And that's exactly what we've done here. From the client machine, you see I already have a remote desktop session open, and you'll see that I am indeed on my GlobalMantics SharePoint-13 server, and in fact, I already have central administration open and waiting for us. And the first thing we see when we take a look at central administration is this. The SharePoint Health Analyzer has detected some critical issues that require your attention. Now, this is probably almost always going to be here. There's always going to be something about your SharePoint that SharePoint feels is not exactly right. And that's very, very common. We don't have to panic. In fact, let's go ahead and let's take a look and view these issues. And when we do that, we see that the issues that have arisen right now are mostly because, well, let's be honest, we haven't finished configuring our SharePoint farm yet, have we? We still have a lot of things that we have to take care of. Missing server-side dependencies. Okay, in most cases, you're going to see this one here because the search administration web part is being referenced, but it's missing. And the reason it's missing is because our search service has not been set up yet. Now, that's something we're going to do a little bit later. And once it's set up and we've changed the account from the farm account, and again, we'll get to all of this stuff later, this is most likely going to be gone. Say 9 out of 10 times this issue will be resolved. Outbound email has not been configured. Well, yeah, we haven't done that yet. We will in a future lesson, but we're not there yet. This has to do with our search. We haven't created the search service yet. And my sites, we haven't created any of that yet. So it's not uncommon to see this little thing up here, and you can go ahead and you can take a look at it, but for the most part, and at least certainly in this case, it's nothing we have to worry about right now, so we're going to just ignore this. All right, before we go ahead and get to making a web application, there's one more thing we're going to have to do. Remember we talked about managed accounts. We are going to have to register a managed account to be the security account for our application pool that we're going to create at the same time as we create the new web application. So what we're going to do is go down here to security, click on configure managed accounts, and we're going to add or register a new managed account. Now we see so far only the SP service and the SP farm. And what we need to do is add this account, SP admin. So I'm going to put in the name. It's our GlobalMantics SP admin account. Add our password. And we've already talked about our automatic password change and having SharePoint take care of that for us. And for our purposes, we're not worried about this, but in your organization, you may have to deal with that password change policy. But for us, we're okay. Let's go ahead and click on that. And now we have that added. So let's go ahead and let's go right to application management now. And then go right to manage web applications, which takes us here to our web applications page. And we see the two that we've already looked at. We're already familiar with these. We looked at them. We saw them in IRS. We've talked about them. Our SharePoint Central Administration and our SharePoint 80. Our default web application that was created when we ran the Farm Configuration Wizard. So what we're going to do is create a new web application. And when we read our little tooltip here, it says create a new SharePoint web application, which in turn creates a new IIS website with backing databases that can be used for creating new SharePoint sites. Sounds familiar, doesn't it? We had a whole lesson on this. So let's go ahead. This is what we want to do. We're going to click on New and working on it. And it's not that easy. There is a lot more we're going to have to do before this is completed. But while it's working on it, remember I told you we were going to create two web applications. We're going to create one for our GlobalMantics intranet site collection and one for our My Sites site collection. All right, here we are on our Create New Web Application page, and the first option we have is, do we want to use an existing IIS website? And if I click there and look at the drop-down, you see we only have two available to us, and we don't want either of these. We want to go ahead and create a new IIS website or a new web application, which is the whole point of this lesson, isn't it? And you saw there just for a second it kind of shifted and paused, and then all of a sudden generated a new random name for us. And we could use this if we wanted, but we're not going to. We're going to delete that, and we're going to create a name for our new web application, something that will be obvious and something that's going to be easy for us, that when we're looking for it, oh yeah, there it is. We're going to be able to find it. So I'm going to very simply call this one GlobalMantics Intranet, and that'll be obvious to probably anybody just exactly what this web application is for. And you'll see it generated a random port, and that's also not the port we're going to use. We're going to use our default HTTP 80, not 800. And of course, if we were using SSL, it would be 443, but we're not. All right, let's take a look quick at our path here, and you'll see that it really doesn't have much of a path. We need to go ahead and create a host header. What we're going to do is make it once again easy to find this website. So we're going to call it intranet globalmantics.com. So all we'll need to do is type that into our browser. And if we go now and take another look at the path, we'll see there it is, intranetglobalmantics.com. It has the port number. We won't need to include the port number when we're looking for it. That all looks good. Let's move down here a little bit and see what else we have to deal with. Do we want to allow anonymous connections? No, we don't. We only want authenticated users on our intranet, so we're going to leave that at no. And are we using SSL? We already said no. So we're going to go ahead and leave that just like it is. Our claims authentication types, and we have two, NTLM or Kerberos, and we will leave it at NTLM. Do we wish to enable forms-based authentication? No, we do not. This is all good, looking good. Now, when we get here, we have the option to create a custom sign-in page if we want, and we would need to go ahead and put it on our SharePoint server somewhere and add the URL to redirect, but we're not going to bother with that. We are fine with the default sign-in page, so that looks good. We see our public URL, and just like we saw, that's our host header, intranet.globalmantics.com. We'll leave it at the default zone, and we're going to move down here and work on creating our application pool. Now then, do we want to use an existing application pool? Let's go ahead and take a look at our choices. And we see the SharePoint 80. This is the one that was created when we ran the Farm Configuration Wizard. And we have our default app pool and a few others in here, but we don't want any of those. The whole point of this is we want to create a new application pool. And remember, we talked about application pools, using them to help us isolate users, services, resources for security reasons, whatever it is. And the whole point of us creating this new web application for our intranet is we also want to create a new application pool for it. So we are going to then again give it another name. We don't want the random name. We're going to go ahead and name it GlobalMantics Intranet, same as we did for the web application. All right, now we need to select a security account for this application pool. Predefined is not an option, but configurable is. And you'll notice right at the top is that SP admin account that we just went ahead and registered. And we also see our SP farm and our SP service. Now, if we hadn't registered that one, it only would have been the SP Farm and SP Service. But that's the one we want, the SP admin account, so that's good. It's looking now for the database server. Where are the databases for this going to be created? And it found it automatically. We didn't have to put that in. It is our GM SQL-12. That's great. And the database name. And boy, there's a long and easy to remember name, isn't it? Yeah, I know. That's sarcasm. We're going to go ahead and simply call it, can you guess? GlobalMantics Intranet. And again, when we're looking for the databases, it's going to be real obvious where that database is, which one it is. And we'll go ahead and why not use the Windows authentication? It is recommended. It looks good. We don't have a failover database server right now. That is something that can be added at a later time, but we're not going to go into that. That's a whole nother lesson for a whole nother course. Now, let's go ahead and let's take a look at service application connections. We can go ahead and use all of these service applications with this particular web application if we want, or we can go ahead and create a custom one. Let's go ahead and select that. And notice that we have all of our service applications listed there, but there's no check marks. Remember when we had default, they were there, but we can go ahead and create a custom, and let's say maybe we don't want all of these things, and that would allow us to create that custom service. Now, I'll be quite honest with you. I'm fine with using the default, so we're going to go ahead and just leave that for now, but I wanted to show you how we could go ahead and create a custom set of service applications. And think about that in terms of, now with our intranet, a lot of people are going to be using it. We probably want a lot of our service applications, but you may be creating a web application at some time that doesn't need a lot of these features, a lot of these service applications, so you would create a custom one and just select the ones that you need. Do we want to enable the customer experience improvement program? Sure, why not? I'm going to say yes and click OK. And we're going to create the new web application. And like it says, this shouldn't take long. So let's pause here and I'll come back when it's done. All right, while we're waiting for our web application to create, let's take a quick look here back at our slides. And we'll see that here's our web application. This is the web application we're creating now, that GlobalMantics Intranet. And this is the URL. This is our host header. Remember, we added that in, intranet.globalmantics.com. But this is only the URL that's going to get us to the web application, essentially. We will need to, when we add a site collection, we're going to have something after that /, especially if we're going to have this web application host multiple site collections. And we're going to talk in more detail about that. We'll have managed paths, and we'll talk about wildcard inclusion and explicit inclusion. And depending on which way we go with that, it'll determine whether we can have multiple site collections in our web application or just one. And like I said, we're going to talk about that in great detail in another lesson when we go ahead and start to create site collections. Well, by now our web application should be finished, so let's go ahead and let's take a look back at our SharePoint server. Hey, and look at that. We are done indeed. Application created. Always a good sign. Whenever we don't see an error message, I think that's a good day. And like it says, if this is the first time you have used this application pool with a SharePoint web application, you must wait until the IIS website has been created on all servers. By default, no new SharePoint site collections are created with the web application. If you have just created a forms-based web application, then before creating the new site collection, you will need to perform some additional configuration steps. Now, we didn't use a form-based authentication, so we don't have to worry about that. But, like it says, we need to go ahead and create a site collection. They are not created automatically on this web application. And if we were going to go ahead right now and continue on to the site collection process, we could simply click here. But we're not going to do that. We're going to do that in another lesson. We actually have to go ahead and create another web application before we're done. But let's go ahead and let's say OK. Give that a minute to refresh, and there it is. There is our GlobalMantics intranet. And if we want, let's go ahead, in fact, and let's go to IIS. And there is our GlobalMatics intranet web application that we just created. Our bindings have been set for intranet.globalmatics.com on port 80. That's because that's what we did. However, any other call being made, regardless of the URL, on port 80 is going to go to our SharePoint 80 site. And if you're going to use more than one web application on our farm with the same port, what you want to do is make sure that you add that host name, that host header, to each of the bindings to ensure the paths. In fact, move on out, and we can see that the port bindings are at 80, just like we specified. And if we go to our application pools, there's our GlobalMatics Intranet application pool. Pretty cool. So that was good. That was very successful. Let's go ahead and let's do it again. All right, we need to go ahead now and create another new web application. This one is going to be for our My Sites. So we're going to do the process again, and we're going to go a little bit quicker because, again, it's basically the same process, but I just want to go ahead and make sure that you're right along there with me. You see everything that I'm going to do, everything for our SharePoint installation here. So we are going to create a new one. This one is going to be called GlobalMatics My Sites. And again, we will choose port 80. Our host header is going to be mysites.globalmatics.com. Double check. Looking good. All of these are going to remain at the defaults, just like we had before. And we're going to create another new application pool. And we will use the SP admin account as our security account for that. We've got the right database server. Let's create a new database name, though. GlobalMatics My Sites looks good. All of this can be fine. And again, we'll leave the default applications, service applications, and that looks great. All right, let's go ahead and click OK. And once again, we'll pause here while that's created. Hey, look at that. We did it again. Our application was successfully created. Told you it wouldn't take long. Let's click OK. Let that refresh, and there it is. Now we have our web applications that we need to go ahead and continue on. And you're probably thinking, excellent, now we can go ahead and do our site collections, but there is one more thing that we need to do before we can call it a day on this lesson. That's right, we need to configure DNS. So here we are at our domain controller in our DNS manager. Now let's go ahead, let's open this up. You'll see that we already have a forward lookup zone for GlobalMatics. We already have some A records, including ones, of course, for our SharePoint server, our SQL. And because this is our intranet site, we only need it to be pointing internally. Now, we may eventually decide that we want that to be accessible from the outside, so we may need to create a public DNS record, but for now, we're fine. Let's go ahead and let's create our new host. So we'll click on GlobalMatics here, we'll right-click, I should say, and select New Host. And in here, let's give it a name. Let's call it Intranet. And we need the address. And what we need is the address for the server. And that is the address to our SharePoint server, which we see already here. That looks great. Now let's go ahead and let's do one for our MySite web application. And again, the same. Beautiful. So now we see our A records for our intranet and our MySite web applications. Excellent. Let's go ahead and let's go back and take another quick look at IIS, and then we'll wrap this up. All right, so here we are back in IIS. Let's expand that. Let's take a look at our sites. So this lesson, let's review real quickly. We went ahead and we created 2 web applications. We created the one for our GlobalMantics intranet and the one for our GlobalMantics MySites. And we're great. That's a great position now. We're ready to go ahead and create site collections for each of these. And let's go to our application pools. And we also created separate application pools at the same time for each of those as well, for the intranet and the MySites. And we certainly could have shared an application pool, but I figured, what the heck? Let's create one for each. And like we've talked about in the past, it all depends on your organizational needs, how you go ahead and separate these application pools and these web applications. Well, gang, that's it for this lesson. Thanks for listening, and I'll see you next time.